I'm Kirstie. I'm the Client and Partnership Liaison Manager at the Vulnerability Registration Service. Today, our session is the Vulnerability Jigsaw. Now, what that basically means is what we're doing is bringing together 5 different organisations as well as our own, which offer different kinds of services to for vulnerable people, and explaining exactly how they can help those people go forward. So we've got presentations from Helen talking about the Vulnerability Registration Service, from Ben Furlong of EstateSearch, who'll be talking about estate management, from Cath Wohlers from the Illegal Money Lending Team, who'll be talking about loan sharks and the victims thereof, Rosie Lyon, winner of the Young Banker of the Year worldwide, and talking about how you can help those within domestic abuse situations. Kim Hopkins from Welsh Water, who'll be talking about their amazing incentive that they've got at the moment, as well as Ascendant solutions and the blended data solutions they use to identify vulnerability, affordability, and collectability. So we've got a packed agenda today, so I hope you guys are all ready for that. So we'll kick off after myself and Heidi have done the intros and moved on from there. Then we'll move on to Helen, then it'll be Ben, then it'll be Cath. We'll have a break, comfort break around around 10:40 to 10:50. Then we'll finish off with Rosie, Kim, and Richard, and round up around 11:35 reflections a day, including our VRS's question and answer from Helen Lord. Okay. Heidi, did you want to do any further admin for people?
I think most people know how to do Zoom now, but obviously I'll just really quickly run through. As you've probably noticed, I have got the power to mute you, so please don't take it personally. It was just if there is a little bit of background disturbance going on while people are talking, I will mute you. But if you can, while there are other presentations going on, if you can use the button at the bottom of your screen called which says mute, that would be great. Stop video and start video. We'd love to see all your lovely faces. If you're out of your onesies, that'd be great. We'd love to see you all. If not, no worries. We've got 132 people here at the moment. We do have other people coming through at the moment as well, so the numbers are probably going to go up. And you did, if any of you did actually come through the attend button on Eventbrite, there is a little, not Eventbrite, on LinkedIn, there is a little bit of an issue with their event system at the moment. So apologies if you've been inundated with lovely messages from Helen giving you the links, but next time we will make sure that that's sorted out. But we do need you to register on the Eventbrite link that is on the event page, just so then obviously when we want to share anything after the event, you know, we've got your details to send it on to you. The bottom of the screen, you'll see the word participants. You can click on that and it will give you the list of the participants. At the bottom of the participants list, you'll see a raised hand button. When we have the Q&A sessions after each of the speakers, it'll be great if you use your raised hand button, because as you can see, there's going to be quite a few screens of us here today. So flinging your arms about, we're not going to see you. So if you use the digital hand, that will be much better for us. If it's not at the bottom of the participants list, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the word reactions, and it could be under there. It just depends on which Zoom version you're actually running on your system. The chat box, as I've said earlier, if you do need to rename your screen name, please pop that in the chat to me as a direct message using the chevron next to the word everyone. And obviously you can use this chat to share stuff with anyone on the screen today. Also, you can obviously do some networking if you like, and just private message people and have a little bit of networking time too. Apart from that, I think that's all I need to really share. So any issues you've got during the session, if you want to pop a message through to me, I can help you. Otherwise, we are recording this today and it will be shared afterwards. So I'll leave it over to you now to carry on there, Kirstie.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you so much, Heidi. That's brilliant. So what our sort of sessions will entail, so each presentation will be around 10 minutes, followed immediately after by a 5-minute Q&A. So what I'll sort of do is sort of be the moderator for the day. So if you want to either raise your hand on the screen, a virtual hand on the screen, or pop a message in the chat, I will then sort of select someone to either read out their question if they want to. If you want me to read it out, I'm more than happy to do that. So it's absolutely fine. So I'll give you a little bit of information on myself from the Vulnerability Registration Service. So my experiences, I spent 9 years for CIFAS leaders in fraud prevention, starting within administration, slowly working my way up through compliance and training, and ended up working within my sort of personal favourite area of work within consumer protection, before finally moving on to the Vulnerability Registration Service, when one of the projects that I managed at CIFAS was put out to tender, and I felt so passionate about the continuing the work of protecting vulnerable people that I moved across to VRS to continue working on that project because they were successful in gaining that bid. We're a couple of minutes early, but Helen, if you're ready.
Sure.
Okay, great. Then we'll crack on. So I'd like to introduce you to Helen Lord, the CEO of the Vulnerability Registration Service. Heidi, if you can put on the next screen, that would be great.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending, and thanks to all the people that are speaking. Really appreciate it. What I wanted to try and really do today, I'm very aware, there's no central place to identify vulnerable customers. It's a challenge that I think every sector has, all of us have. What we've tried to do with VRS, and we've been going for the last 5 years now, is work across different sectors, different organisations, and try to pull a comprehensive database that gives you an idea of which of your customers are in a vulnerable situation. And this is kind of where we are now. This is just to give you an idea of the picture that we've started to pull together. And the people that are speaking today come from different areas, but we're working with all of them in terms of identifying vulnerability, and they'll be able to talk a little bit about why that's important, how you can use that information, how you can integrate that information. So we set up our database, as I said, about 5 years ago, and it is intended to be a high-level indicator of vulnerability. And we pretty much started off in financial services. I mean, that's certainly my background. I spent a lot of time in credit referencing and data protection. But we did realise that we needed to build up a slightly more granular picture around how people saw themselves as vulnerable. And it's not just limited to financial vulnerability. There's a financial aspect, there's the financial capacity aspect of it, but that sort of very often overlaps with other things, and other areas are equally as important. So while we do highlight financial vulnerability, in a way it's over and above what you'd expect to see, say on a credit reference file or in an affordability model. It's serious financial vulnerability. It's people that need treating slightly differently. We all know about the overlaps with financial issues and mental health. I mean, the flags that are shown at the bottom of this slide are the ones that we use, and they are still very, very high level. There's detail beneath all of those, but I think we accepted fairly early on, if we were going to get this thing moving, we couldn't describe every type of vulnerability that was out there, but what we could do was allow organisations to get an idea of the type of vulnerability and know that somebody needed treating in a particular way or in a special way. Having said that, some of the registrations we get, about 6 or 7 of those flags can be ticked for one individual. So the way we get information on board, the first way is through signposting, organisations working with us, working directly with the general public and alerting them to the fact that they can register with us and notify organisations that they're in a vulnerable situation. And that might be charities, issue resolution there, so it's complaint management. Resolver, for example, has started signposting people to the VRS, and we get consumers each day registering their vulnerability with us. We work with organisations like Gatter, again, an area I think probably when we started off, we didn't really realise the broad spectrum of what we were dealing with, but obviously online gambling is a massive issue. GamCare, GamStop work in terms of supporting people with gambling addictions. Equally, that can be relevant to other sectors and as important. British Legion in terms of Veterans Gateway, all pointing people towards us. So that's one aspect of how people reach us and register with us. And those are just some of the examples of organisations that we're working with. And then obviously there's service providers. So these organisations, these sectors can all work with us and retrieve the information and access the information and help to identify whether their customers are vulnerable, but equally they might be identifying vulnerability in their own customers that may be relevant to other sectors. So we are working with financial services, we're working with insurers who potentially don't have a clear picture of who their vulnerable customers are in the first instance, because of the nature of the way they do business, the nature of the way people take out insurance. Utilities, and I've spoken to a lot of you here, I've spoken to multiple utilities organisations, and I know that there is a big battle in terms of how you share your priority service registered codes, how you find out whether more and more customers are vulnerable, and of course you've got the added challenge in terms of fuel poverty and the impact that that's going to have. And I think Kim will be talking a little later from Welsh Water, and I think what Welsh Water have done is really insightful and interesting, because they have started on this journey. They are doing things, and I think some of us are struggling with data protection restrictions or potential constraints and needing to work through those, but there is a potential to do things and start to share data, not just within the water industry but more widely, and I think she lays testament to that. And even if it's address-based, that's one of the interesting aspects. Some organisations don't necessarily need to know the name and details of the individual, other sectors do, but it may be just knowing that somebody's vulnerable at an address is valuable. Telcos, housing, and we've seen the press around housing recently, and I think there's again massive overlaps between things like housing, local authorities. The same vulnerabilities need to be borne out and are relevant to all. We're working with a lot of collections companies and, as I say, online gambling. We work with organisations that offer support, and I've put consumer support here because I didn't really know how to encompass it, but debt management companies working with consumers. If somebody's on a debt management plan, then that's probably wholly relevant to many other organisations. Working with charities, working with organisations like that provide support for domestic abuse victims, where there's very likely to be an element of economic abuse. The illegal money lending team, I know we've got Cath talking to us later, and I was really pleased with this partnership. Victims of loan sharks, it's very relevant to most of the sectors that I just talked about. If somebody's suffering from that level of coercion, then their priorities probably aren't going to be paying their utility bill tomorrow or paying that credit card bill tomorrow. They've got other things, and there's perhaps need to really take them out of the typical collections or customer journey. And then we also get information directly from consumers registering with us, or where there's a power of attorney. So if somebody holds a power of attorney over a member of their family, we will validate that and we can load that information. But there's also court of protection orders, there's also appointeeships. And so we work with lots and lots of organisations to get that data on board as well. So we are working with many local authorities taking on board court of protection order data. So individuals who are lacking the mental capacity to manage their own financial affairs and really probably shouldn't be going and getting those mobile phones and vehicle finance. And what we can do with that is we can flag that up to lenders, we can flag that up to organisations, and we can alert the organisation that provided us with the information in the first place if an application to any of those lenders has been made, so it can be stopped in its tracks and dealt with straight away. Similarly, estate management, Ben's talking to you a little bit more, and I know Ben will illustrate the importance and how that information should be used. Similar from solicitors, and also with appointeeships and money management companies. We worked from very early days with Money Carer Foundation, and they provide us with huge amount of data about individuals that really should not be being extended finance. And part of our data where somebody shouldn't be provided with credit facilities, it will flag that up and say that those applications should be declined, and it's typically in these circumstances. So talking to Sean Tyree yesterday at Money Care, I said, give me some examples of how you're using this. One was a young man with serious autism. He's going into mobile phone shops and obtaining mobile phone contracts, which he can ill afford. And equally, he is being encouraged by people coercing him to sell those mobile phones or just pass them on to him. So he's just laden with a shed load of debt. Now, we would notify Money Carer Foundation if an application has been made in that name, if we are working with those telephone, those mobile providers. We have to, there's two sides to this story. We have to have people using the data as well as people providing us with data. Similarly, he gave me an example of a middle-aged gentleman with learning difficulties who'd managed to get out 20 Sky Media contracts just in the last year. Again, if we're working with an organisation, we can notify the source of that information that those applications have been made. So could I have the next slide, please, Heidi? And I think I'm very aware, we're very aware that identifying vulnerability isn't the full story. It's one thing knowing who's vulnerable. The next problem is how you integrate that into your systems, how you access the information, how people actually start to use it and how they act upon it. And finally, what do you do if you've identified a vulnerable person? There's a huge range of aspects of it. We've talked about financial vulnerability, there's mental health, there's coercion, there's a whole spectrum of different aspects to it. And one of the challenges that I get faced with when I'm talking to organisations every day is, okay, once we've identified these people, how do we know what to do with them? And it's across the board that this is an issue. So what we're planning on doing is we're having another event on the 23rd of June. I'm putting it out so that, you know, if you want to attend, please do. Probably a longer event where I really want to cover the whole spectrum in terms of not just identifying vulnerability, but how you can integrate that into your working practices. I know that it's not necessarily the best option just to integrate directly into VRS. It might be better to work with an existing solution provider that you're already getting solutions from and integrate that way. And our data is getting out there in multiple different ways. We're already working with the likes of Picasso, Morgan Ash, IE Hub, Data on Demand, Ascendant, who are speaking to you a little bit later on, Synectics, Connected Data, W2 Global. We've got arrangements in place to work with multiple different organisations. So if you work with a solution provider, it might be worth looking at that as an option to get vulnerability data. As part of that, we're a growing database, the value is going to increase, the benefits are going to increase. The sooner that information is accessible, really, the better, and you can start working through and identifying how to use that information ongoing. We can provide batch services. Our technology is a basic API link. We can also help monitor existing customer databases to determine where somebody has gone on to our database or actually removed themselves from our database. So it's updated in real time. As I say, we need to know what to do with vulnerable individuals once they're identified, and I don't think there's ever going to be a single answer to that. What I'm hoping to do in June is demonstrate how the various service providers that are out there trying to address vulnerability can all work in cohesion and a streamlined approach, hopefully to give you a solution that you can really use with less hassle, for want of a better description. And some of those things are VCX's signpost, which I know Chris is on the call, he'll talk a little bit later. We've got things like income and expenditure solutions, speech analytics. I think Ravina are on the call. Carolyn Delahanty, I've spoken to extensively about inclusive service design. Staff training is obviously integral. Bespoke information solutions, and also working with organisations that know what they're talking about, like Refuge, I believe, are on the call today. Again, the illegal money lending team, they have insight into how to treat people and how to handle people. So I don't think there is a single answer to any of this whole process at the moment, but I'm hoping that we can draw it together by working together. And I'm hoping at this, certainly in the June event, then we'll be able to demonstrate how those various solutions work together in a streamlined way and be able to demonstrate that. So that's what we're looking towards, but today's all around how we identify vulnerable individuals, and I hope you'll get a lot from it, and the speakers today will talk through that. So any questions for me, I'll obviously pick up, but apart from that, I'll leave it with the others to speak. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much, Helen. That's absolutely brilliant. There was a message in the chat from Ripon saying that he recently worked with the UK Power Network to support the Bengali community in East London by doing a YouTube video and online leaflets. Local residents recently had a power cut, so they found the leaflets and the video very useful, which is very kindly put in the chat. So if anybody wants to have a look at that,
I think what Kim will be talking about in terms of Welsh Water, and I know Tom Braith is on as well, the initiatives out there to address exactly this situation, they're working and they're brilliant. You know, if we can identify that there's vulnerability to address, if there are outages, if there's power cuts, if there's things like the storms last weekend, there are ways to sort of start to work through this and address these things.
Brilliant, that's fantastic. So did anybody have any questions for Helen at all? If you wanted to raise a virtual hand by clicking the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking raise hand, or if anybody had any questions that they wanted to put in the chat, you're more than welcome to. Anybody got any queries for Helen at all? There was a message come through from Mahalid Kamali. Just to rip on, can you kindly share the link again? Oh, that's fine. Carolyn Mann Eastlight has asked a question in the chat saying, can you provide some demographic information regarding vulnerable customers to find hotspots, Helen?
Yeah, we can do. I can tell you off the top of my head, the biggest hotspot we have is the Northwest. It's and as I say, we're a growing database, and I think we'll see different trends and we'll get different insights as we go forward. But I think the emphasis in the Northwest is too distinctive to not be a real one. I don't think there's any false positives there. We also, the other areas are in Lincolnshire around Gainsborough and Motherwell, Hamilton in Scotland, and those were the outstandingly distinct areas that we saw, but Northwest absolutely. But I do have demographic information that we can let you have.
Thank you. There's a message from Fred from the London Borough of Camden saying that he's put notes on 4 different credit referencing agencies, but their client is still able to open bank accounts and get mobile phone contracts. How can you stop this, Helen?
I think I mean, you can never absolutely stop it. I mean, and as I say, this is always going to be a chicken and egg situation. We're getting this data on board and we are reliant on people starting to use it, which they are increasingly doing. So it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people aren't prepared to share the data, then we can't get people to use it. If people aren't going to use it, we can't get people to share it. Now, I think we're getting through that now, and we're getting real traction in terms of having a really viable data sharing proposition that is being used in anger and is working and highlighting vulnerability. But in terms of quarter protection data from local authorities, we are sharing 30, 40 different local authorities, but we have to talk to you one by one to get an agreement in place for you to share that information with us. Now, clearly there's no fee for ever sharing data with us. It's simply if there's a legal basis to do so, and obviously, if there's a quarter protection order in place, there is. It's simply having that supplier relationship in place and sharing that information, and we can get it out to more and more people. And on the credit reference agency front, I'm 20 odd years with experience, my background, and I know it's always been a battle. Vulnerability and identifying vulnerability has always been a battle. I think what we're doing, and we will increasingly and hopefully be working more and more with the credit reference agencies, I think these problems will gradually go away and they'll be the exception rather than the rule where people are extending credit when they shouldn't be.
We've got a couple of people raising hands, so we'll do those questions first before we move on to the next speaker. Leslie from NatWest, do you have a question you wanted to ask Helen?
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. You mentioned about challenges with GDPR, and I wondered if you had any top tips around that, because we absolutely have challenges with that on the basis that we hold our vulnerability information. So interesting to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and I realistically, and I mean, we did a couple of previous webinars about this, and I think everybody is battling with this. And the reality is there are absolutely ways through it. There's nothing in data protection law that's preventing data sharing. It just, like anything else, needs to be done in the right way with the right legal basis to do so, and it needs to be shared responsibly. I've spoken to the Information Commissioner's Office about it, and I think what we're going to do with them is start to produce at least case studies that they can demonstrate. There's no barriers to what we're actually doing. A lot of our data is consented. Some of our data will be shared on the basis of legitimate interest, but certainly we can share previous webinars. Rob Bell presented a couple of times for us and sort of covered this off, which hopefully might be useful. And Kirstie can, I'm sure, will share the link to the information that we got out on our website around this.
Yeah,
I think
that's really helpful. I've not seen that webinar, so that would be helpful. Thank you.
We'll let you have that, Leslie.
Thank
There
you.
you go. I've sent you the link to our website showing the written version of the GDPR, but I'm more than happy as well to send you a link to the web recording on that as well, Leslie.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
No problem. Greg, do you have a question for Helen?
I do. Firstly, thank you very much for hosting this, and I'm just going to put my camera on and let's see. Sorry about this.
Hi, Greg.
Hello there. Thank you for hosting this. Just a couple of questions. Apologies if it's been covered. I just was trying to note down as much as possible. Let's just say we were to sign up with the Vulnerability Registration Service. Would we then search each time an application was made to us to see if they were on the vulnerable register, or is this what does that journey look like?
I mean, the journey is dependent on you, and it depends on when it fits in the sort of customer life cycle, really. Organisations might want to search transactionally, they might want to search on batch. As I say, we can monitor customer databases to alert if somebody goes on or goes off a database. So it was really fitting it in where it actually works for you. And as I say, we are talking cross-sector. Different organisations have completely different needs. I think the one advantage we have, we're fairly small, we're fairly agile, and this is all we do. So we can work it to make it work for you.
So thank you. For example, in my case, we're looking to offer credit cards to customers, and of course there is the risk of meeting vulnerability needs. And just at what point do you think from a bank's perspective would I go, right, this is when I need to log on to the VRS to what would you say would be the best use of the VRS?
Well, personally,
like yeah.
if you're receiving applications, then
yes.
I would say absolutely at application stage.
At application stage.
Ongoing for customer management as well, ongoing customer management.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't have any other questions this time. But
thanks, Greg. Thank you.
Lovely. No, fantastic. Thank you very much. So we've got, if we move on to our next presentation, we're a couple of minutes behind. Ben Furlong, are you with us? Are you ready to go?
Yes, Kirstie. Yeah. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, if you can. If your Wi-Fi allows you to, that'd be brilliant.
Should be okay.
Yeah, that's all good. We can see that.
There you go. Okay. All right. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for hosting today, Kirstie and Helen, and thanks for inviting me along to sort of give a brief presentation around what we do, and so importantly why we work with the VRS and where we see the benefits of this, and really where we see the importance of data sharing in terms of preventing fraud and financial abuse in terms of the customers that we work with. So my name is Ben Furlong. I'm the Client Services Director at EstateSearch, and just to give you a brief bit of background to what we do as a business, we are a legal technology company, and we aim to build innovative technology solutions that help support better outcomes for vulnerable clients. There's a focus for us is very much on the legal sector, because legal professionals play a really critical role in supporting people with vulnerability at various junctures to their life. So whether that's where they're dealing with estate administration because someone's passed away, and obviously you can imagine the family are grieving, it's a difficult time, it's a hard process to go through, and they are struggling to know what to do and how to deal with this. But equally, there could be illness. And the other one we see a lot about that Helen mentioned earlier is loss of mental capacity. So where someone's appointed attorney or deputy for someone who might be losing or have failing cognitive ability, legal professions will often be appointed in those roles to support, help manage that person's affairs. And I've got some case studies which echo some of the things that Helen was talking about, how actually that's a really difficult situation. It's not always as clear cut as a person loses mental capacity, they can't deal with their own money. There's a lot of fluidity between what they can and can't do. It's not a sort of white and black area. working with professionals, really what we try to do is understand those challenges they're facing and then try and figure out how we can bring data and technology to bear with other partners like the VRS in terms of building solutions to support them. And just to give you an idea, we currently work with over 1,000 legal firms across the nationwide, so it's a really big number of law firms we're now working with in terms of helping them create more streamlined and efficient processes, because efficiency in terms of legal processes helps save time and money. So for the end client who is vulnerable, that's good for them because that reduces their cost. So that's good. It mitigates risk and potential costs or liability associated with that process, which could then obviously create issues for them later on. And also, I think particularly related to what we do with the VRS, it can help prevent fraud and financial abuse. And that's a real key thing that we see happening, not just in the mental capacity space, but also with deceased estates as well. Just to give you a bit of flavour about that, I'll talk through where the challenges and issues we see in terms of deceased and mental capacity estates we work on. So looking at deceased estates, which is probably the majority of our work, probably 2/3 of our work is around deceased estates. It's really difficult to get numbers for the UK, but what I think was really interesting when we first started working with the VRS, and we were looking at figures to support what we do and make our decisions about how we face these challenges, is the report that came out in America. So the AARP, which is the Association of American Retired People, I don't think they like that name anymore, so they'd like to be called AARP now, reported that identity thieves were using the identities of 2.5 million deceased Americans annually to fraudulently access financial services. So that's accessing credit cards, mobile phone contracts, setting up bank accounts, and the like. And while some of this was accidental, where they just make up a social security number and accidentally it turns out to be a deceased person, the report further identified that actually 800,000 of those cases were deliberately targeted. So the fraudsters knew the person passed away. They knew that there was this limbo period between when banks and financial institutions or the government knew the person was actually dead and it was recorded on databases from when they actually died. And they were using that delay, that period, to target those estates when people weren't quite sure and people weren't really checking and watching what's happening because they've got other priorities, to go in, open credit cards and things, take as much money as they could and then get out again. So it's a real problem. And whilst we've got this data for America, I know it happens in this country. It's attempted in this country. It definitely is something that people go for. And there was a report done by STEP, which is the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners, which estimated the cost of probate fraud in the UK to be around £150 million per year. So a lot of money. Not all of that probate fraud is to do with identity theft. There's various other things that go on and can cause issues, but undoubtedly some of it will be related to this fraud. And again, when they surveyed legal professionals in the UK, 1 in 2, so 50% of them reported encountering fraud in the probate case they dealt with. So it really is a problem. We need to think about how can we take steps to prevent this and make sure everything's as safe and risk averse as possible. The reason why and how this sort of happens in the UK, if you start to think about how this could take place, how could somebody take advantage of deceased estate, is there's a few reasons which our digital site is helping. As part of the legal process when someone passes away, quite often what you will do, or what a legal professional is required to do, is place an advert in a publication called the Gazette to advertise for potential creditors and basically let the world know the person's dead so they can find out if anyone was owed any money. This is an online source. It's free. If you Google it now, Gazette Wills and Trust Notices, you'll see it. And it's a big long list of everyone who's died with their first name, middle name, surname, and where they lived and when they died. So you've already got some really key personal information about these people just there in a list you can easily scrape and download. Alongside that, you have things like obituaries in local newspapers. So that's another source of information in terms of name, address, and actually sometimes often put things like date of birth and date of death in that without thinking about it. But that means, again, all of that personal information you need to open a bank account is there online for someone to source, access, and then use illegitimately. And similarly, things like social media posts and updates. Think about your Facebook. If any of you are on Facebook, think about your Facebook. Everyone says happy birthday to you, right? It's very easy to figure out actually what your date of birth is from that. It's not particularly difficult. So it's really easy to identify people who have passed away and then source their personal information that you need to open a bank account, name, address, date of birth being the key things. It's not really difficult anymore. That information is out there. And we've mentioned Facebook. It lets you share information on everything from your date of birth, your educational history, to your favorite music and films. So again, people use this information to commit fraud. They do. That's what they do. They're out there doing it. And LinkedIn similarly lets you share information about your CV. So there's lots of information there about people who have passed away that people can use and legitimately use to gain access to financial services. If we start to think about the issue of mental capacity, you touched on this earlier, Helen, I think, about, lasting power of attorney and court protection. I don't think you touched on this one, but there are, last time I took the data, which was a year ago, so I suppose it's gone up, there are over 7 million lasting power of attorneys registered in the UK, and there are 60,000 deputyships. So there is a lot of these instruments out there granting people authority over other people's estates and affairs. And while most of those people who are appointed attorneys or deputies will genuinely look out and support their loved ones, cases of fraud and financial abuse are really common. If you speak to any solicitor or legal practitioner involved in this, fraud and financial abuse or abuse of trust happens quite a lot. And often it starts off with something, actually I've taken my mum to the shops, I'll just take some money for some petrol, and then it starts to develop from there. And before you know it, they're doing things that perhaps aren't in the best interest of the person looking after. And abuse of trust was identified by Action Fraud as one of the key areas of fraud against vulnerable people. And their report found that a third of the victims who were subject to abuse of trust had impaired or failing cognitive functions. So it was definitely skewed towards people who perhaps weren't able to say no or stop or stand up for themselves. Victims often reported that there were abusive relationships that involved family members or partners, ex-partners, friends and carers. So the people who are doing this are known to them. They are the people who tend to be looking after them and then just taking advantage of the situation to financially better themselves quite often. And in many cases, as I say, at the bottom, the victim details were used to secure credit without their knowledge. And that could be credit cards, mobile phones, car loans, things like that. And again, if we talk about some case studies that you might find useful. So one of the first cases we ever did to demonstrate, which was really interesting, was where we worked with a solicitor and did a search against a lady who'd lost capacity in the 1990s. And her son had been appointed her deputy. And after the husband had died, the son moved the entire family overseas because he got a job in America and they lived over there for 20 odd years. Over that period of time though, P's needs became more complicated and the son found it too difficult and the cost of care in America is very high. So he renounced and actually moved his mum back to the UK where there was no other family. So a panel deputy, which is a legal professional, was appointed to look after it because there was no one else in this country to do it. The son, when he sort of renounced and handed that case over, he provided very little information in terms of what there was in terms of support and financial things in place for his mum. And he was very tight-lipped about everything. And part of what we did as part of our process with the lawyers is we helped identify the things that were in the estate, and actually we identified an annuity with Prudential. And suspicions were raised a little bit when it became apparent that the payments were still going out to a particular bank account, so this annuity was being paid out, but the deputy had no idea where it was going. And actually it was what was really alarming was a couple of weeks later, after they changed the arrangements and the money was going to a bank that was controlled by the deputies, they could look after this person. There was an email sent into the bank from P, mother, saying, where's my payments gone? And that was backtracked and transpired to find out that actually it was the deputy who obviously knew about these payments and was just taking advantage of them and collecting them, was then trying to sort of say, where's this gone? So people do these things to each other, and it's ripe, it's really problematic. A later case that we came across, I think, illustrated things as well, relates to the court protection. So this was really interesting where, again, this P lived with his family, but the court had decided that his family were not the right people to look after his financial affairs. I don't know the full facts of the case, but ultimately it was decided they could not look after his financial affairs because they weren't going to do it properly or have his best interests at heart. So they appointed a professional to look after his financial affairs. But even after the court order, we talked about this already, applications did carry on being made for credit cards and mobile phones and even car finance in P's name, because he had a big lump sum of money that was due to him as a result of what had caused the sort of mental issues experiencing, and his family were basically trying to use his better credit rating to get things that they wanted and they needed. And that's his family that he lives with. So we need things in place to stop these kinds of issues happening, much as when, Helen mentioned the case study where a gentleman was going into mobile phone contracts, taking out mobile phones, and then whoever was coercing him to do that was then selling them. This sort of stuff happens. So what we do with data sharing is we share information on all the deceased estates we see and mental capacity matters we see with the VRS so that these things can be put in place. I think when we're talking about deceased estates, the reason why we see this is really important is because while there are mortality databases out there and you can source information on mortality, they can be slow to update. It does take 6 to 12 months sometimes for these deceased people to appear on these national mortality databases, which is that period that fraudsters are using to try and take advantage and access financial services. Whereas our service and how we work with the solicitors means that we can be instructed within a week, say, of the person passing away or very quickly. And because we share data electronically, that information then hits the VRS database very quickly, it's updated immediately, and as they mentioned, their database updates in real time. So if you are receiving applications for credit cards, as just Greg talked earlier, the idea of this service, or how I see the benefit here, is that you get access to information much quicker. And what we do with the VRS is we use their service to flag deceased estate so that you can see and know through the data set that you're collecting that it is a deceased estate. And if you know it's a deceased estate, what you can do is just put a hard stop on it, right? If someone's making an application for a credit card and they are known to be deceased, that should not go through. There's no referral, there's no discussing with anybody. It just shouldn't happen. Obviously, we do share details, so you can contact people if you need to, but really that needs to stop there, shouldn't go any further. On the other side of it, with mental capacity matters, where we share information, again, the reason we see this being so important is because there is no centrally available database for attorneyships or deputyships. Helen mentioned earlier, obviously, they're starting to work with various different local authorities because that's a big source of where these deputyships come from in terms of trying to collect data and then share it onwardly. But there are other sources, so lots of professionals are appointed, and that's where we tend to work, particularly the panel deputies. But you can't just go out and find out about these things, they're not there. But so starting to collect this information to one place, you've got an understanding of actually who's got deputyships and internships in place is really important. You can't simply go to the OPG and ask them for a list of LPAs that they've got in place, because the problem is of those 7 billion instruments, whilst they're registered, they're not an LPA. Whilst it's in effect straight away, the problem is that the person you've got it might not have lost capacity yet, so there might not be any need to do anything yet. You don't need to start working with them or think about it yet. You only need to start thinking and worry about it when that person has lost capacity and someone is starting to act on that behalf of somebody. And again, with how our service works, we can only be instructed and know we can only start to work when that person is struggling to deal with their financial affairs and that person is appointed. And again, what we do is we provide that information through to the VRS alongside the information of the attorney and the deputy. So if there is an application in one of those names, and again, how we flag this through the VRS system is that rather than putting a hard stop on it, it has a referral flag. So if you receive an application, well, our advice is if you receive an application for somebody who's got a deputy or attorneyship, you shouldn't necessarily stop that going through, but it should flag and you should have a think about it, and you should change your custom process or your customer service journey to think, what should we do? Should we contact the attorney and deputy to see if it's legitimate or authorised, or do we let it go through and then contact them afterwards? And the reason that's important is because I mentioned earlier, capacity is fluid. So a lot of people, a lot of these professional lawyers, when they're working with people, particularly in deputyships, some of them will have capacity to deal with some elements of their financial affairs. So they might be capable of making a decision about getting a mobile phone contract. They might have one current account which a certain amount of money is put into, so they can manage daily lives and do their daily shopping. And that's good to support them and give that ability to do that. But you don't want them to have free reign of full credit control, because they might just start taking out services that they don't understand and then find themselves in financial difficulty. So it's trying to build services and build this in a way that supports that fluidity of capacity and ability and gives them the opportunity to live, their best lives, really. So that's a bit of information about how and why we share that information and where we've seen it being really important. So yeah, that's a bit of information about me and us, and my details are on the phone, are on the screen there. I'm going to apologise. I think, Kirstie mentioned, I'm going to have to go to another meeting in the next sort of 15-20 minutes. If anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, if you've got other questions that crop up later on, Kirstie and Helen both got my details, and you're more than welcome to sort of send them questions or ask them to put in contact with me. But thanks for your time.
Right, okay. Thank you, Ben, appreciate that. Greg and Angela, if you want to either email me or drop me a message in the chat what your queries were for Ben, that would be great. Apologies, he's had to dash off. He's got meetings going on. My apologies. Cath, are you with us this morning?
I'm here. I'm not sure about with it.
Oh, I can relate to that so much, yes. All right, Cath, are you sharing your presentation, or is Heidi for you today?
I can do either. I don't know. It's up to you guys. What works best?
Do you want to share it if it's
No
easy?
problem.
Yeah, okay.
Check.
I'd like to introduce you to Cath Wohlers from the Legal Money Lending team.
Good morning, everyone. I apologise. I'm absolutely full of a stinking cold, so I may sound a little bit dopey. I promise I'm normally fairly with it, but today is just one of those days. My name's Cath Wohlers. I am the LIAISE manager with the England Illegal Money Lending team. So in terms of what the relevance is for today and for vulnerable people, we are a criminal enforcement team set up by the government, paid for by a levy on the legitimate credit industry and hosted by Birmingham City Council. And what we do is prosecute loan sharks. That's all we do. We are the England team. There is a Scottish team, a Welsh team, and a presence in Northern Ireland as well. And we have very much a kind of team of two halves. So we have investigators who go around locking up the bad guys. That's an interesting job. And I manage the rest of the team, which do all the kind of victim support, witness support, lots of awareness raising, a prevent agenda to try and stop people using loan sharks in the first place, but also looking at generating intelligence for the team and looking at how we can bring loan sharks to justice. So the biggest tool we have, I think, in our arsenal for vulnerable people is that we can remove loan sharks from communities. But alongside that, there's an awful lot of work we can do to try and stop people who are vulnerable using loan sharks in the first place through education initiatives and promoting things like credit unions as an alternative so people can save and borrow affordably and safely with a different institution than with the illegal lender. We also run financial education programs in school, and we do a lot of training for partner organisations, trying to tell people this is what a victim of a loan shark might look like. This is how you can help them. This is how you can kind of warm refer them into us for our support. We used to be a team that was very much about enforcement, but we're more and more about supporting people and supporting people away from loan sharks and to make whatever decision they want to make about the future of that relationship. We're not just about getting witness statements and taking people to court. It's very much a holistic approach to victims and victim support. There is a breadth of illegal lending. So when I say loan sharks to people, they tend to think of kind of a Phil Mitchell type character, you know, big balding cockney with a baseball bat and some lads behind him going in and threatening people. Last year, the people we supported, 2/3 of them believed the loan shark was their friend at the time at which they took out a loan. So it might be someone at the school gates, it might be someone they've worked with, it might be someone they've known on the estate for years, but they genuinely believed this was somebody who was helping them out. They weren't actively going to a loan shark. And you could argue that's part of the vulnerability, this belief that someone is your friend when actually they're going to bleed you dry. Most loan sharks will say they charge double bubble. If they mention interest at all, some of them won't. Some of them it will be £500, pay me back you can. But if they do mention interest, it'll be double bubble. So you pay back twice what you've borrowed, except you won't. Because the turnaround on that will be so quick, you can't pay twice back what you've borrowed in the time they want. So what they'll do then is double it again. Or you'll pay it successfully for a couple of months and then you'll miss a payment and they'll double it. And so it goes on and so it goes on. We've worked with people who borrowed literally £300-400 and paid back 90,000 on that original loan because the loan shark kept finding new ways of extorting money from them and saying, you haven't paid, you haven't paid, you haven't paid. We do get loan sharks who are linked to organised crime groups, but that's rare. We get more loan sharks who claim to be linked to organised crime groups, but aren't. And it's just another tool of control and making sure that people carry on doing what they want them to do, basically. The same way we get the elusive Mr. Big, not a Sex and the City reference, but actually a reference to the idea that there is somebody else behind me. So I'm lending you money and I'm lovely, I'm your friend. But what you don't want to do is miss payments because him who lent me the money to lend you, he's not going to like that. And I can only keep him away from your door for so long. And that maintains this relationship between you and me of manipulation and coercion and control. But the threat is still there of Mr. Big, who probably, again, doesn't even exist. I say coercive control again, that the sort of assumption about loan sharks is it's lots of threats of broken legs and things like that. We do see that, but the vast majority of loan sharks, it's coercion. It's, well, you borrowed the money, I helped you out. Your partner doesn't know about this loan, does he? It'd be terrible if you found out just before your birthday and things like that. And it escalates from there. We do see physical threats, but very, very little actual violence from loan sharks, because if they do that, they've kind of broken pack and they've gone against what their next threat could be, because if they've done it once, what do you do next? It's much more about implied threat, control, and keeping people paying. Increasingly, we're seeing lenders on the internet, so on social media, including things like dating sites, but also on Snapchats, Facebook groups, and so on, where they don't actually ever meet the borrowers. We also see it on WhatsApp groups, where the lender might be in Huddersfield, but they'll have victims in Stoke and London and Newquay. because the thing they've all got in common in this instance would be a country of origin. So we've had cases with the Zimbabwean community, for instance, a lender in one place lending to members of the Zimbabwean community in the UK all over the country. All done on a WhatsApp group, and there the control is very much about shame. So I would put on the group that, you know, unfortunately this week, guys, can't do any loans because Kirstie hasn't paid me back last week's loan. And then everyone doesn't talk to Kirstie for a week. And that's very isolating, especially when you're a foreign national in the UK. We also see parallel lending, which is where someone works for a legitimate company, maybe a doorstep lender, and has their own book on the side. So they'll lend you money from their employer legitimately, but then if you run out of credit rating, or if they just want to, they'll lend you some at their back pocket as well. You may believe the whole loan is with the legitimate company, but actually that they're doing it in parallel. Quite hard to detect that one sometimes. A few victim stories to emphasize the kind of difference in vulnerability. So Mark was a gentleman who came to us. He was from London. He was from Southeast Asia, and he'd borrowed money from someone he worked with. And the deal was he wasn't borrowing the money, he was renting it. So he rented £2,000. And the cost of that rent was £200 a month. So he had to pay £200 a month, but he wasn't paying back the capital balance. That wasn't reducing at all. It was just rent. When he missed a payment 1 month, it doubled to £400 a month rent, but he still owed the £2,000. He missed another payment 6 months later, it doubled to £800 a month rent, but he still owes the £2,000. And it spiraled out of control. Mark was ostracized in his community. The loan shark had very high social standing and was very much about telling people not to befriend Mark, not to talk to Mark, because he was bringing the country into bad reputation, and he wasn't living up to what he should be doing because he wasn't paying his debts. He also turned up hammering on his door and was very disrespectful to his children in the street, and Mark ended up pushed right to the edge. Now, Mark went to Citizens Advice, and Mark disclosed that he was the victim of a loan shark. They supported him to contact us. The loan shark was dealt with. Mark is now in a much better place. He's moved away from London. He set up his own business, and he's a very different man from the one I first met probably 2 or 3 years ago. But it shows the vulnerability. That was someone in work, someone who thought he could handle himself, someone who would describe himself as the family man, the breadwinner, and he ended up in the grasp of a loan shark from rented debt with no mention of a loan whatsoever. Matthew's a bit different. Matthew borrowed £250 from his wife's friend who she went to school with when he was 17 to repair a car that he needed for work. He was a postman. He agreed to pay back 5 times £50, and he did. The next 5 months when he got paid back 5 times £50. 2 months later, knock on the door. You owe me money. I paid you back. There's interest. I don't do this for nothing. You owe me £200. I haven't got £200. That's all right. I'll lend it to you. But that's subject to interest as well. And Matthew's the gentleman I spoke about before. He never saw any more cash than that original £250, and he paid back 90 grand. £90,000 to this loan shark who we thought was a friend, someone his wife went to school with. He got beaten up in front of his children, and he ended up attempting to take his own life as a result of that. Very, very vulnerable. But from the outside looking in, no, he had 2 jobs at the time. He was holding them down. And it's a good example, I think, of hidden vulnerability in terms of someone who had that going on in the background. And you could see it in a way because he was getting to a lot of legitimate debt as well, because he'd pay the loan shark before he'd pay his rent. He'd pay the loan shark before he'd pay any other credit that he had as well. Paula is a victim who came to us via a domestic violence charity in the Northwest. So she was a lady who had been fleeing an abusive relationship, and she'd applied to the charity for a grant. They had to support this grant. They had to look at her bank statement and verify that she was in need so that she could get this grant. And when they looked at the bank statement, they saw a lot of third-party transactions being paid into her account, which we would say is evidence of a loan shark. They anonymised this statement and sent it to us and said, we're concerned. We said, that looks like illegal lending. They spoke to Paula, and it turned out she wasn't lending. She was the victim of a loan shark. And 1 month when she couldn't pay, he said, that's all right, I'll use your bank account to make other people pay in, and then you're money laundering, not me. So he was actually utilising her bank account. Paula, very vulnerable anyway because of the DV situation, and that kind of spiraled. And it was that quick-witted DV worker who actually spotted it, and we supported Paula away from the loan shark at the same time as she was supported away from the abusive relationship. This guy's an example of someone who's gone online. This is a guy called Rovin Mavunga, who's a business student at Sheffield Hallam University. Paid a Snapchat influencer to advertise his loans, didn't meet any of his victims. It was all done online, advertising on Snapchat, meeting people on Snapchat, talking to them on that, and then bank transfer for the loan, payments both ways. He would ask people for photos of their ID and income, and actually use Snapchat to threaten victims, pretending he was around the corner from their house, putting a photo for one girl of her mum's front door with the car outside, as if to say, this is what I could do if I wanted to do so. He charged double bubble, but you had to pay him back within a month. And you can imagine, if you're someone who needs £500 on the 1st of March, you haven't got £1,000 to pay back on the 31st of March. So people then ended up having to borrow the £1,000 that they owed him. So they ended up £2,000 the month after, £4,000 the month after, and it spiraled out of control very, very quickly indeed. In terms of what we do as a team, we are all about the victims. So we will not take enforcement action if we believe it puts people at risk. Anyone that comes to, we look at their needs and we look at the risk associated with them. We can move people. We do it only in extreme circumstances, not that often at all. We'd much rather keep people where they are and remove the lender from that community and from their lives. But it doesn't matter whether or not people will tell us about the lender. It doesn't matter whether they'll give us a statement or not. We support them no matter what. We'll look at their housing situation. Are they about to be evicted? We'll look at their financial situation. Have they got court judgments coming up? Whatever else they've got going on, we will support them. And quite often that support leads to them disclosing about the loan shark so we can take enforcement action to remove them. So these are new things that we can do, and an offer as well. So everything that we offer is free of charge. We are already paid for by the government. We don't charge for anything that we do. During lockdown, we produced an interactive film called Shark. I will put the link in the chat at the end. It's a brilliant piece of theatre done by some young people, she says, patronisingly, in Liverpool, because I'm getting old, so everyone's young. And basically, it's a piece of theatre that you watch on screen and you make choices. So it's about a guy who's at uni and he borrows £120 because he owes his roommate some money for a mobile phone bill. When that happens, it turns out he's borrowed from someone on Snapchat who was recommended. They turn out to be a loan shark. It was our response to the Snapchat loan shark. You then choose what you do next. Do you get help? Do you not get help? Do you borrow more? Do you not borrow more? And the story goes in different places depending on what you select. So it gives people the chance to walk a mile in the shoes of a loan shark victim. My parents, who are in their 70s, managed to have an argument over one of the choices, so that was good. But I do recommend it just as it's really entertaining, if nothing else. It's really well done, but it's a really good way of showing the issues around illegal lending. It's really good if you're working with young people. The big thing we offer is training. So we're currently doing it online or face-to-face, whatever people want. We've got various training modules we do. The big two are what is a loan shark, which is very much about how victims may present and how to warn, refer them to us, and then barriers to engagement and how to overcome them. So if you're a housing officer and you know there's stuff going on one of your estates, but no one's talking, we'll look at what we can do about that as well. In the second one, we actually tackle GDPR. From our point of view, we're quite lucky because there is a criminal exemption. So if you are aware of a loan shark, you can tell us about it without any repercussions whatsoever because it's criminal activity. We're changing our language, as I said at the start, to specialist support around illegal lending. We introduced live chat on our website as well at the start of lockdown, and we're getting about 10% of our intelligence through that now. So people, as well as phoning the hotline, which is 24 hours a day, can actually live chat to us and type a conversation. And they feel sometimes, I think that's more anonymous, and it lets them feel supported. And sometimes then they get the courage to speak to us either face to face or over the phone. For people who are here, a big one might be online banking. So we are starting to utilise online banking to generate intelligence about loan sharks. I presented at ABCUL on Monday for credit unions about how organisations who use open banking can use it to spot loan sharks or victims. It's a half-hour session, again, free of charge. If you want us to come and talk to your staff, we'd be happy to do so. We've got all sorts of hints and tips about what our financial investigators look for when they look at bank accounts and how that can be useful to spot loan sharks and victims, and then next steps if that's something that you do. We're hoping to work with some of the big banks around this. If you are interested, like I say, please have a conversation. We'd love to do it as widely as possible to get the intelligence coming in and support flowing out to people. We've got social media stuff that we do as well, lots of campaigns. And as I say, we work with credit unions too. That was quite a quick tour because I'm conscious of time, and also that at some point I'm going to start coughing and not stop. That is my email address and phone number, our hotline and website as well. The big things I think is takeaways. Whatever we offer is free. If you would like training, if you've got concerns about any clients, if you'd like us to look at your processes and say, this is where we think you might have access to people who have contact of loan sharks, let us know. And the big thing for us in terms of working with the VRS, it's all about that sharing of data. So we are registered, we will register loan shark victims with VRS as people who are at risk of coercion, so that that data can be taken into account when they're being dealt with in the future. I think it's a brilliant system. I think it's long overdue, and I really recommend it to anyone today who hasn't signed up already. I will stop wittering now, and if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them. My details are there, and I'll put links in the chat as well.
As ever, Cath, that was absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's a couple of questions, couple of just comments in the chat just saying that was absolutely brilliant. One just says, "I feel sick."
Oh, sorry.
So it just shows just how impassioned these things make people. There's a question from Kirstie from SDL saying, "How are loan sharks removed from the community, and are they monitored to prevent restarting in another area?"
That's a really good question. They're removed because we arrest them and we prosecute them. So if you lend money without authorization from the Financial Conduct Authority, it is a criminal offence, maximum sentence 2 years at the moment, although there is a research paper coming out at the end of March, which may see that changing, although I'm not allowed to say too much about that at the moment. So it is a criminal offence and we will prosecute it. We also prosecute for every offence that we find. So we prosecute for money laundering, we prosecute for blackmail, for rape, for firearms offences, for all sorts of different things. When they come out of prison, the assumption is they are rehabilitated, as with any criminal. But what we will do is work very closely with the community to make sure they are aware that we are still there and that this is still illegal and that they cannot go out and reoffend. What we tend to find is the vast majority don't, but where they do, people are very quick to tell us about it. That initial wariness about coming forward goes because people know they're not untouchable anymore. They've done time for it and that they're not allowing them to come out and restart, if that makes sense.
Do one more from the chat and then we'll go on to Ripon, who's had his hand up patiently. Claire from Loans at Home says, "What is your view with the decline in the home collected credit industry? Do you think it will drive people to loan sharks?"
I think it's really hard to tell. It's a question we get asked lots about the pandemic. It's a question we got asked about universal credit. And it's one of those things, we know it takes people an average of 3 years to report a loan shark. So anyone that's borrowing at the moment, because Provident, for instance, aren't doing doorstep loans anymore, we're not going to see the evidence of that for 2 or 3 years. What I would say is the vast majority of loan shark victims borrow year in, year out for everyday living expenses. That's the biggest reason every year. 2/3 of victims last year, that was the reason they borrowed. So it's not people borrowing for big TVs or holidays, it's everyday living expenses. So anything that creates a problem at that end of the market, I think cannot be a good thing, whether it's rising energy bills, whether it's withdrawal of legitimate credit, whatever it is that puts a pressure on people, loan sharks will prey on that vulnerability.
Ripon, do you have a question for Cath?
Yeah, hi Kathy, you probably don't remember me. But
I do remember you, Ripon, I do.
So the question is quite simple actually. How do you think, because you talked about shaming, and also shame is a big part for some illegal lenders. So how do you think we can break the shame culture?
Oh, it would be really nice if there was a button to push, wouldn't it? I think the best way really is to get people talking about it. So one of the things we're trying to do with debt advisors at the moment is say, ask the question to everybody. Then you're not having to make a call if this person could be the victim of a loan shark or not. In the same way you'd say, have you got rent arrears? Have you got council tax arrears? Ask them, have they borrowed from a loan shark? And I think by having that conversation, that's part of normalizing. And as part of normalizing, hopefully then becomes a more of a willingness to talk about it from people who are in that situation and those who aren't as well. Yes, I've just seen a comment in the chat, Kirstie, about declined customers, and that's something we're quite interested in as well. So one of the things we do with the open banking, as I said, if you discover a loan shark after you've had our training on open banking, that's brilliant because you can send us their details, they're a criminal. If you discover as victim, you can't because there isn't that GDPR exemption. So we've got a form of words which we're working with various credit unions and other credit providers to give out to say, this is what we suggest you send to someone who you think may be the victim of a loan shark through your work with them. And the same with declines. You know, I think it's really difficult to sort of say automatically go here instead, but we have a kind of duality of message about if you're looking to borrow because you're in debt, please get debt advice, please don't borrow to get out of debt. And if you are looking for a sort of loan, look at a legitimate lender, make sure they're FCA registered, and don't borrow from the man down the pub, basically.
Thanks, Cath. Chris from KM2 has asked, do victims get recompense from recovered monies?
Occasionally, but not as often as we'd like. Loan sharks have awful record keeping abilities, and quite often it's very difficult to evidence who's borrowed what when, who's paid what when, because even if they are using bank transfer, there's also cash going on left, right and centre, and there's goods being exchanged and things as well. What we do with proceeds of crime when we get it back, occasionally we do get it back for victims, but it's the exception, not the rule. we will try and put it back into the community. So we'll do community projects, we'll go into local schools, we'll spend the money in the community with trying to stop people using loan sharks, whether that's an awareness raising campaign. So we've done drama projects, murals on the wall, board games in the park, anything and everything, or whether it's something like a child benefit loan website with the credit union, so they can help people to borrow affordably and not have to use loan sharks in the future. So the money will get back to the community, but it might not get back to the individuals.
Great. Okay, we'll do one more from Grace from FHDC. In terms of court fees from repossession action or rent arrears accrued as a result of being the victim of a loan shark, are there funds available to clear this?
There aren't at the moment, but I'd love there to be. One of my things at the moment is we have got loan sharks who will take people to county courts and claim it as friends lending and try and get a CCJ against them that way. And I'm working at the moment at sort of strategic level with government to say that's absolutely ridiculous, should not happen. And what actually should happen is if that person is then proved to be a loan shark, there should be a pot of money which pays to have that CCJ removed, or it should just be automatic, you know, it should just go. So I hadn't actually thought of that one, but I think I might add that to my badgering. Thank you very much for the idea.
There's a couple more questions which I'll drop across to you in an email, Cath, if you can get back to those guys, that'd be great. Yeah, because we're running a little bit behind time now. So what we'll do is we'll have a 10-minute break, so you guys can have a bit of a comfort break. It's 10:52 now. If we can come back at 11:02, I know it's a very specific time. If we can keep to that as much as possible, then we'll kick off with Rosie Lyon, who'll be talking about domestic abuse and her own personal situation that she experienced herself. So if you guys want to sort of stay on the camera, but just put your cameras on mute, put your microphones on mute and turn your cameras off for the next 10 minutes. We'll see you guys back in 10 minutes. Again, thank you so much, Cath. That was incredible. Didn't get a chance to say that to Ben before I hit to dash.
Okay, Kirstie, shall we kick off again?
I said 11:02. Just to give them a little bit.
Oh, very, very precise.
I know it was very precise. Yeah, I appreciated that. I should have said 11:05. But
I love that. That's great.
I don't know. I'm turning into my father-in-law, sort of thing he would say. Right, okay, Rosie, are you with us?
Yep, I am.
There you are. Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, not so bad, thank you. I appreciate you joining us. I know you've obviously got a very busy day, like you've got another webinar this afternoon that you're speaking at.
Yes, I do.
Right, because you haven't got a presentation for this one, have you? You're just doing you. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Okay, well, I'd like to introduce you guys. Hopefully you're all back and all comforted from your break. I'd like to introduce you to Rosie Lyon, winner of the Young Banker of the Year award, who'll be talking about her experience and domestic abuse in general and how she thinks that we can help more people in her situation. Rosie, if you'd like to kick off.
Perfect, thank you. So hello everybody, and thank you for having me. My name's Rosie and I've experienced domestic abuse. I got in a relationship when I was 17 years old and I was with this individual for just over 7 and a bit years. At the age of 22, I bought a property with this individual and it was a joint mortgage property with a high street bank. In 2019, I decided that it wasn't working for me. I'd had enough really with the relationship and I broke up with him in June 2019. It didn't come as a shock and he took it really well. You know, at the time, I didn't realise that I was going through forms of domestic abuse during my whole 7 years because it wasn't physical. It was more financial and emotional. So once I'd broken up with this individual, it started to become emotionally abusive. I'd get on the train on the way to work. I work in the banking industry. I used to travel 2 hours one way. So I used to get on the train relevantly early. And I would get phone calls screaming and shouting at me, telling me that they're going to burn my mum and dad's house down with them inside it, smash my car up. So I used to have to keep missing work, getting back on the train to go home, just to make sure that the threats were empty threats and not real. In October of 2019, I had to call the police because he physically assaulted me. And since that day, I've been unable to get back into my mortgage property. I was paying the bills and the mortgage fully from my bank account. It was a joint bank account, but we split it when we broke up from June 2019 until January 2020. I got legal advice for a solicitor who told me that I didn't have to pay the bills, which I didn't actually realise, foolishly, but to pay my part of the mortgage. But of course, I wanted to make sure that the mortgage was paid in full. So I continued to pay that mortgage in full up until September 2020, even though I hadn't had access to the property to October 2019. A lot of police visits, there was a lot of court hearings, and in regards to my solicitor, I was getting emotionally abusive letters from my ex-partner telling me that I had to pay all of his bills, I had to pay the mortgage, he was going to sue me, he was going to take me to court, he was going to take me to prison, and it was a very difficult time for me. And in September of 2020, I decided, because there was no sort of support that I had from the bank whatsoever, that I had no option but to stop paying, and it was going to ruin my credit records, but it was my only option. So I'd let the mortgage bank company know of the situation from the get-go, from when we first broke up in June 2019, and kept them informed. But when I stopped paying the mortgage, which I wrote to them, I called them, and I also emailed them, and so did my solicitor, they started, obviously with their procedures, bombarding me with phone calls every single day asking me why I wasn't paying. Of course, they'd put a note on the system of the situation that it was domestic abuse, but they refused to look at the notes. They told me that they wanted to hear it from myself, so I had to retell my story, which was quite traumatizing and upsetting, and it was really difficult to get these constant phone calls. And then there was one instance when I rang the bank, I got put through to the contact centre, and I asked if my data was safe. I had changed my phone number, all my other contact details, my address. I didn't want my abuser to know where I was living. The contact centre said they wasn't sure, but of course they wouldn't give it to him through common sense. I got put through to the debt collecting service. They said, well, if he asked for the information, of course, we'd have to give it to him, which is obviously a data protection breach. And then I got put through to a specialised vulnerability team who said across the board, everybody knows that we're not allowed to disclose any information, which is obviously incorrect because of what I'd been told. I then got looked after by the vulnerable specialised team. I gave them all documentation, including GP letter, support letter, the restraining order I had in place, police documentation, and I kept them informed the whole way. But I realised from my own personal experience that there was a gap in the financial institution market. There was no policy in place, there was no sort of understanding of domestic abuse, and I wanted to bring change at the time for myself. I didn't realise that so many people went through it. So I contacted my mortgage bank, said, did they have a domestic abuse policy in place? They said no. I then contacted HR in the bank that I work for, and they said they didn't have one, but by law they didn't need to, so they wasn't going to put one in place. And I thought that wasn't good enough. At this stage, the repossession was still going on. I wasn't paying. I couldn't even leave my property because of the anxiety and the fear. But there was a competition called Young Bank of the Year Worldwide Award. It's a worldwide competition. All the banks sit on the Chartered Banker Institute, and it was around 57 countries involved. And I had really low self-esteem, had no confidence, but thought I wanted to bring some sort of change to domestic abuse. So I put my ideas on paper, I sent it off. I started to get through to each round, and then by the end I was into the final. I was the first UK female in the worldwide competition final. I was the only female in the final, with my idea for a fairer financial future for sufferers and survivors of domestic abuse. It includes raising awareness, implementing training, enhancing policies and procedures, and how to obtain lending opportunities for them sufferers and survivors that have poor credit due to no fault of their own. I won the competition. I was the first UK female to win that competition. And since then, I brought out domestic abuse policies across the bank that I work for, in credit reference agencies. I was the first person to bring out a domestic abuse policy in banking in Ireland. I work with the CEO of AccountScore and Equifax, where we're looking at open banking to look at holistic information on income and expenditure, rather than just a poor credit scoring, because at the moment, currently, I cannot get a phone contract out in my own name. We piloted that and it was successful. We piloted on myself. I was able to obtain lending because I could afford it. We are now looking at getting that put into place by the end of the year. We're working with UK Finance, the FCA, HM Treasury. I also raised awareness. I started sharing my story. Some of my LinkedIn posts get over 125,000 views. And during all of this, as it's quite short, so I'll keep it brief, during all of this and all my achievements that I've done within a year, my abuser is still living in the property, refusing to pay, refusing to sell, and refusing to leave. It is still in repossession, and it has been since 2020. And of course, you know, there is a lot of financial abuse still going on there. He comes to the surface as and when he decides he wants to come to the surface. But I am now taken back the control. I've helped sufferers and survivors. I've had comments from individuals that have seen my work, that have inspired, and they've now left their abusive partners safely after being stuck in relationships for 19 years. And I believe that if we was able to share data and information in regards to obviously GPs letters, solicitors letters, all round, then we wouldn't have to be re-traumatized with telling our story. Currently in the bank that I work for, I brought out a new procedure as well, where you can open a bank account just on a GP's letter if you do not have identification and proof of address. And we're also looking at using that as an element of how to obtain lending opportunities, how to show evidence that you've experienced domestic abuse. If you want to look at more of my ideas, feel free to please connect or follow me on LinkedIn at Rosie Lyon. Thank you.
Rosie, as always, I am completely in awe of you. That is it's just so heartening just to see just how far you can come from like one side of like living to the complete polar opposite of making something so positive out of something that was quite atrocious, bless your heart. Yeah. And yeah, I would always want to get you onto these things, because yeah, this is all what we're about, just trying to help as many people as possible from varying levels of vulnerable experiences. I mean, yeah, I cannot just say, yeah, with my clap, because that's amazing. And so you can probably see in the chat as well, there's loads of ones saying the same thing. Well done, like such an inspiration. You're so brave. I completely agree with all of these. I'm going to stop rambling on now about how amazing that was and just how brave we think you are. Did anybody have any questions for Rosie at all? If you want to raise a virtual hand, you can do that by pressing the reactions button at the bottom and clicking raise hand, or you can send us a message in the chat. There's one from Liz from Affinity Water saying, so bear with me, it's moved because there's more people saying how amazing you are. Yeah. Do you work with organisations to review processes, etc., to identify how victim survivors can be better supported?
Maybe in the future I'd love to do that. I'm one-man band, and I work full-time for Allied Irish Bank. But what I do is I sit on the board at UK Finance with the banks in the UK, and we try to be consistent. I'm going in as a lived experience where we're going to see if we can put all procedures into place. Quite a lot of banks in the UK have signed up to the Financial Abuse Code, which was brought out by the UK Finance, and we made that to pledge to loads of different things of what we can do for sufferers and survivors, and we're working through that. But also during my free time or during my working day, I volunteer with lots of charities, so charities that bring in sort of training in workplaces, get businesses to pledge that they'll raise awareness, get businesses to pledge that they'll employ sufferers and survivors that have gaps in their CVs. So there's lots of different things that I do to try and, you know, raise awareness and help domestic abuse sufferers and survivors in that way as well.
Lovely, thank you, Rosie. Ripon, you had a question for Rosie.
Yeah, Rosie, well, by the way, your story is amazing, obviously, naturally. Yeah, of course. The question is, whilst you were trying to raise awareness, what sort of obstacles did you come across from organizations, and how did you overcome those obstacles to bring about positive change?
Yeah, I mean, there was some obstacles, obviously, trying to get the idea in place, such as the whole, right, we're not having a policy because by law it's not one. So there was a bit of pushback and stuff like that. But for me, how I overcome them was just my passion, my purpose and my drive. And it was like, well, that's not good enough. If I ever come across another organisation that ever said anything like that, then it's tough, it's not good enough. I want to make it by law that you need to have a domestic abuse policy in the workplace, because over, I think it's around 2.3 million UK adults have experienced abuse in their lifetime.
Great, thank you, Rosie. Leslie from NatWest, you had a question?
Yeah, it was more an observation than a question, really, to say I'm so sorry that you went through that experience with a high street bank. That's horrendous. And I want to say we've come a long way since that experience, and we have signed up to the vulnerability code, the financial abuse code, and we're currently working through our gap analysis on that to make sure that we're meeting everything we should be meeting. So, you know, I'm sure a lot of that is to do with what you've profiled and what you've brought about. So thanks for that. And as I say, I'm really sorry you had that experience. Hopefully it would be a much better experience now.
Thank you.
Great. There's one more question in the chat from Lana, and then we'll move on. A lot of financial institutions do not employ people with poor credit history. Do you think there is scope? Sorry, email coming. Do you think there is scope for policies to be implemented to address this, where poor credit history is linked to domestic/financial abuse?
Yeah, and that was my main concern, was obviously, say for instance that I got made redundant in banking, and then I wanted to obviously stay in banking because I love working in banking. I have poor credit. I'm like, oh my God, they're not going to look at me. But I think because of the policies, because banks are putting different policies in place, including domestic abuse ones, that will factor that part in. And if when, you know, we're looking at pledging with a charity that also looks at that sort of thing. So if banks sign up and pledge for this charity, which is free of charge, and they change their internal processes, then that shouldn't be an issue or a barrier. And especially if you was to disclose that before or while you're interviewing that you've experienced domestic abuse and you have poor credit rating due to no fault of your own, then that should be taken into consideration. And I'm hoping with the changes being made by the end of the year in regards to the credit policies and changing that stuff, then there shouldn't be a problem with that.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Rosie. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, I appreciate that you've got another webinar where you'll be talking about the same thing a bit later on this afternoon. But you are more than welcome to stay if you're able to. But if you need to dash off, we completely appreciate it. You're a very busy person. And I'll be waiting for your book as well, which I'm not expecting you to do next because you've got nothing else to do, have you?
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
No worries. Thanks, Rosie. Okay, Kim, are you with us?
I certainly am, yeah.
Okay, is Heidi sharing your presentation? Or would
No,
you like
I'm going to share. Yeah, I'll share. Not quite sure how I'm going to follow that. This will probably seem a bit boring after the last one, but I'll try my best.
I know this incentive, yeah, it's not boring in any way, shape or form. Quite impressive, if anything.
Okay, so you should now be able to see my screen.
Yeah, that's all up there. So I'd like to introduce you guys to Kim Hopkins from Welsh Water, who's going to present to us on her initiative that she's got going there at the moment.
Great, thanks, Kirstie. So as Kirstie said, my name's Kim Hopkins and I'm a Specialist Support Customer Manager at Welsh Water. And today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how sharing data works for us. So we'll start with a brief introduction and I'll give you a quick overview of our vulnerable customer strategy. And then we'll move on to talk about our data share agreements, covering how they started, how us and our data share partners use the data and the outcomes. And then I'll share with you our future plans and take any questions that you might have. So I joined Welsh Water almost 3 years ago after a varied career in financial services spanning 29 years, and I'm responsible for the delivery of our vulnerable customer strategy and also the leadership of our specialist support team. So my team are responsible for taking calls from our vulnerable customers and providing the support they need. So together we support over 130,000 customers to reduce their water bill through social tariffs. And we now have over 110,000 customers signed up to our free priority services register. So the feedback we receive is excellent, and customers are often surprised by our level of compassion and understanding, and we're often thanked for taking the time to listen to them and provide levels of support that many people don't realise are available. So how did it all start? So back in 2018, our board approved our customer service strategy for customers in vulnerable circumstances. And in developing our strategy, we looked across the water and energy sectors, and we learned from the experience of our partners to identify best practice, as well as carrying out research with vulnerable customers and the bodies that represent them. And we came up with 5 key areas of focus that we wanted to concentrate on over our reporting period, which was 2020 to 2025. So they included data, priority services, financial vulnerability, partners, and training. So with our data, we were keen to work with Welsh Government and DEFRA to agree a data share plan. We'd already heard that there was a project called Jigsaw, and it was a Welsh government initiative to develop a responder community framework. So we were keen to get involved with that. And we also wanted to work with energy and water sectors for data share agreements. So today I'm going to talk to you a bit more about our approach to the data share and the impact that it can have. If I can move forward, 2 secs, it's frozen. Right, there you go. So we were approached by Welsh Government to be part of a Jigsaw project. So the project is designed to share vulnerable customer data at household level. So the agreement's been entered into to support the sharing of data for the purposes of enabling the emergency services and resilience community to identify individual households in vulnerable circumstances so that priority and emergency services can be provided to them. By working with the government, it also enabled the Welsh Government to share with us the shielding data during the pandemic. And this was for the purposes of adding shielding households to our priority service register just temporarily. This meant if we incurred any incidents during lockdown, we could offer priority services like bottled water to those households that were shielding. So you can see the impact that this has. The data share agreement between Welsh Water and Welsh Government allowed 111,000 records to be loaded into the Jigsaw system the day before Storm Eunice arrived in the UK. So this data is then modelled every 30 minutes against the natural resource Wales flood risk areas, and the data is then provided to the resilience teams who support out in the communities. So you can see that Jigsaw provides near real-time access to at-risk properties to enable the responders to access key data on the properties requiring that prioritised response within a defined area during a major incident or in preparation of severe weather warnings or known disruptions to utilities. It reduces the time to capture and distribute key intelligence to responders at a scene of a major incident from over 8 hours to around 3 minutes. The government have also made it a priority to help vulnerable persons with their utility bills to ensure that they have access to clean water and adequate sewerage disposal. So this is a high priority initiative, and water companies have an obligation to offer schemes and increase the level of take-up amongst their customers. The Digital Economy Act now provides utility companies a legal gateway to engage with the Department for Work and Pensions for data sharing purposes in order to realise the government's vision. So each water company across England and Wales runs its own bespoke water schemes, which are designed to support their most vulnerable customers. And checking customer eligibility for these schemes can often be cumbersome for both water companies and the customers, which can result in possible delays in receiving the valuable help they need. So the data share agreement between Welsh Water and the Department for Work and Pensions enables us to review our customers against the data held by the DWP. We're able to identify customers eligible for social tariffs and automatically register those customers who are eligible. Similarly, we're able to automatically review those customers currently in receipt of a social tariff to ensure that those still eligible continue to receive the discount they need. The data share process is now live, with the first file shared on the 1st of November this year, and it enables us to carry out regular audits as well as a proactive approach to support. We've also got agreements in place with Western Power Distribution and United Utilities to share our priority services data. And we also receive data from Morriston Hospital and Cardiff Health Authority of any new dialysis patients, so we can get them added to our priority service register for immediate support in the event of an outage. We don't want to stop there though, we want to go a lot further. We want to increase our data share agreements, and our data protection officer is currently reaching out to all Welsh health boards to discuss how we can work together to support customers when they come out of hospital. So again, looking to add them to our priority service register, whether that's permanently or from a temporary basis, so they know if they've just come out of, you know, having an operation, they're not mobile. If there is a major incident, they're not going to have to worry about getting hold of water. We will get bottled water delivered to their properties. We also work with several local authorities and housing associations. At the moment, we don't do data share with them, but we have got partnerships with them where they're able to apply for our social tariffs on behalf of their customers. And as long as they've seen that the customers qualify for these tariffs, we take that as read because they're a trusted partner, they've had the training. We don't ask to see that that proof that they can apply, and we get those added on. And we've just recently started a relationship with the Vulnerability Registration Service, and I'm keen to work with them going forward to understand how we can potentially share our data to protect our vulnerable customers. So thank you for that, and any questions?
Well done, Kim. I didn't even have to text you to say any questions about running to time or anything. So well done for that. It was brilliant. Does anybody have any questions for Kim at all? If you want to raise a virtual hand or drop us a message in the chat, then we're more than happy to take those questions. I'll say we are. Kim is. Yeah. Leslie, you have a question from NatWest?
Yeah, Kim, I'm interested in your data sharing with the hospitals. Have you got a consent model for doing that with your customers, or are you doing it to some other legal basis?
Yeah, we do it under substantive public interest. So it's not on a consent model. It's under the public interest that we're able to do that. So they're able to share the data with us on a non-consent basis. We also do some of that for adding customers to our priority service register. So because we've gone down that route and the non-consent, we are able to automatically enroll customers onto our register. So we do that for our over 90s. So when you become over 90, we automatically pop you on. And we also do it for our customers that apply for our social tariffs that are telling us they've got some kind of disability or health vulnerability. We automatically add those onto our register as well through that. The only thing we don't do at the moment is we don't share their data with third parties, because we still get consent to share from our customers.
And have you had any kickback from any customer who's objected to you using that information?
No, not yet, only because the service we're providing, really, the main part we're providing is bottled water to somebody that's got their water cut off. So it's not as if we're providing, yeah, most people are happy that they don't have to worry about if they can't get water out of their taps. We're going to be knocking on their door and providing them bottled water.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Okay, Ripon, you've got a question for Kim.
Sorry about this. So yeah, it's partly because recently there's been a power cut in my local area. So obviously,
right.
Power cut, the locals are up in arms about it, and they're thinking, okay, what can we do? Can we sponge as much money out of the supply as possible? So that kind of scenario, really. So the question then is, from the point of view of the vulnerable consumer, what other kind of, let's say when there is a cut in water supply, and as a result of other losses, isn't there? So is there any other benefits that the individual might be entitled to, or the household might be entitled to as a result of a cut in their water supply?
Yeah, so we work, as I said, we work quite closely with Western Power Distribution, which covers a lot of the network in Wales for electricity, power and things. So the reason we share data back and forth for the priority service register, because if a customer is telling us they've got mobility issues, or we've got customers that are like need machinery, severe health problems, and a power cut would really impact them. So it's about sharing that data with the likes of Western Power Distribution. So they understand then the households that potentially need to get a generator out fairly quickly. If we've got customers on dialysis, we need to arrange to get them into hospital fairly quickly. So there's a way that we can work with the wider communities to understand. And like I say, we don't share at a personal level, it's shared at household level. So, the emergency services, people know that there's somebody in that household that's potentially got a vulnerability, and we can focus our attention to those households first, if you like. They take priority.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Okay, what we'll do, I think what we'll do is we'll move on to Richard now. Richard Hanby, are you with us? Are you ready to go?
I am with you.
Yep, you're with us.
Just worried about what I'm following here. This is my presentation about data might be a little bit dull and uninteresting, so apologies in advance.
Not at all. Not at all. It's all part of the bigger picture of creating a whole jigsaw, funnily enough, although we did steal the jigsaw thing, I think, a little bit from Welsh Water, so thank you for that, Kim. Right, so have you got your presentation on the screen? You ready to go?
But as an IT director, I'm a little bit embarrassed. We recently moved to Office and I can't figure out how to start showing my slideshow. Hang on, there we go, from the beginning. There. Right, halfway there. Share screen 2.
Brilliant.
I got there in the end, didn't I?
Yep, it's on the screen. Fantastic. Well done, Richard.
Thanks, Kirstie. Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been really interesting to sit on the call and listen to all the stories and how data is being used. Our business uses the vulnerability registration service data to integrate to a number of other blended solutions that we have with local authorities and with private sector. Our basis really was in the debt collection world, and having been a debt collector and sat and spoken to many a person in debt, these things that are coming forward today from data sharing are really positive and a world away from where I've experienced in the past, even under pre-GDPR, collecting debt from customers and the conversation. So it's really good that we're moving forward, it seems, as a digital economy. So a little bit about us. We have solutions to bring together information about customers and highlight vulnerability and highlight customers' abilities to pay and to interact with authorities and local authorities and with services that are collecting money or attempting to collect money in debt recovery and credit management. We do that through our integrated solution, which we have dubbed Pathway, mainly because we are trying to get the customer into the right journey using these data sets. So we've mentioned a couple of times on the webinar the credit bureau data that's available, and there are modeling data sets available that use a varied supply from a company we use, Elenev, that provide geographical data and geospatial data analysis. The vulnerability registration service is a great place to start before you start contacting customers or before you make a decision on how to approach a customer. If you have a scenario you need to resolve to collect money, to have that flag at the very beginning that there's something that you need to be aware of is great before we start going out and writing to customers blindly. And we also have property transactional data, which indicates rental and sale information about properties. So I've messed up a bit here as I've tried to make this slide a little bit more interesting because people call my slideshows boring. But effectively what you've got in the data world is a big pile of Lego that's a bit unorganized. As you try and put that together and sort things out, it can try and come together as you've seen from my missed illustration. bringing that information together from a number of data sets into viable and useful information that can help you make a decision. And that information can be accessed before you take activity and before you decide to approach a customer in a certain way. So as you mentioned earlier, what was interesting is when making lending decisions, we're making the lending decision, and then when do we look at the VRS data, or when do we look at certain data sets? For me, I'd always want to be informed before we make a decision, wherever possible. And we love the VRS because it's API driven, and as a technology company, that lets us tap into the information as often and as quick as we need to, and in real time, which is really important for a digital economy. So building up information, primarily I'm looking at this from the perspective of local authorities, using credit bureau information, which under GDPR exemptions will be able to tell you a lot about a customer's activity, identifying whether that customer is paying other people as well as whether they are paying your debt, whether they are in arrears, how far in arrears they are, things that could point to financial hardship, which may also point to other vulnerabilities that lead beneath the surface. But credit bureau information can only go so far. The geospatial information and AI predictability of whether somebody can pay, whether an area is in economic hardship, whether there's a high likelihood of deprivation, really important, because we can't just sit there and look up areas and use local knowledge on a mass scale. It's important to be able to model things and understand in your local authority. Yes, there may be local knowledge where we say this street, this area, or on a national banking scale, our call centre staff won't know that when they look at a road or an area that it may be a deprived area. So having that kind of score can help you build a picture of the customer. And then, of course, the Vulnerability Registration Service, topping it up. We kind of look at the Vulnerability Registration Service when we are pulling data from them, because we don't really provide data in, although local authorities can. When we pull data from from the VRS for local authorities, it's a red flag, effectively. It's a case to look at this before we do anything on this customer. Depending on what the credit bureau information may say, they pay everybody on time and everything's lovely. But the Vulnerability Registration Service flag means that we should probably handle this on a case-by-case basis before we send any recovery action out. Look at this customer scenario, look at what their vulnerabilities that are registered are before we go and knock on doors, before we send standard letters and things like that. So in practice, from a local authority's perspective, we know things like homelessness risk, we know rental and sale activity, and we know commercial ownership information from our point of view. These are open data sets and data sets that can be modeled based on public information. As in a local authority, they will know council tax arrears, they will know social housing arrears, they will know sundry and other debts that may be there from housing benefit overpayments and discounts and things like that. Credit bureaus, like I say, can tell you payment trends, solvency history, public data sources like that, and the types of credit used. So, excuse me, in a scenario where you haven't got exemptions to access a person's credit file in full, or you haven't got that consent method, if you're looking for debt recovery, there are credit bureau solutions out there which can indicate the types of credit people are using for. So obviously it won't cover any of those illegal money lending scenarios that were discussed by Cath, but it will show that people are potentially using types of credit that may indicate they are struggling or they are reaching to lenders that are non-mainstream. And then the potential pathways that come from the result of that collection of data and information. So we could look at signposting, the local authorities could look at issuing invitations to conversations about council tax reduction schemes, benefits, potential extraordinary home payments, a local welfare provision potentially to help customers out, housing opportunities, and potentially in rare cases or in severe cases, local authorities are putting together teams in welfare areas to actually do outreach and write to customers and say, we've noticed this in this area, people are struggling with finances. Can we help you? Can we point you towards some free advice? Can the local CAB help you? Here's their contact details. Did you know that these benefits you might be entitled to? Talk to us. Let's see what we can do about your housing. All these kinds of things, and these proactive outreach things are now happening because of the collection of data. And the vulnerability registration is a piece of that jigsaw. Just an example of how we've integrated this into a case-by-case basis. This is obviously fictitious data, but as an example, through our CRM system, when customers are looking at, or when clients are looking at a customer, a red flag, and it is the only bit of red on the credit report search that comes up. We can see, you know, when people are added to the register and let people know that there is, first and foremost, this vulnerability that this person has registered themselves for or been referred for by a data provider to the VRS. It's really important that these are looked at case by case and not just missed out or thought of as a secondary flag. This is the primary thing to be concerned about. And the numbers aren't that high as far as how many match on a data set. It's not an unmanageable number. And I think just to finish off from our side and what we're actually seeing in this digital economy and pulling the jigsaw pieces together, the benefit to the customers and the actual impact of what's happening. This is a slide that we seem to roll out quite often, and you may have seen it in our other presentations, but in Walsall Council, this is their before and after from a traditional letter to collect council tax, from a new approach of combining all these data sets and figuring things out. And the difference is the way that they write to customers now is based on the information they can gather and based on the information that can be obtained from the VRS, obtained from credit bureaus. And that picture drives 100% increase in engagement, at least in Walsall Council, from the letter saying, we can see that you're struggling. We can see that you may be using credit to try and pay your bills. We can see that you're paying the wrong kinds of people, or you may be paying non-priority creditors. Come and talk to us. Or we've identified through the vulnerability registration service that you may need assistance, and we'd like to talk to you about resolving this council tax account. Did you know these opportunities are available to you? And like I say, this is being used by local authorities more and more to pull data together and then put in place teams to actually fix the problems. Rather than debt collection teams, they're looking at teams to be able to advise, and the right people are at the end of the phone when we know they're on the vulnerability registration service, when we know that they're paying non-priority creditors. They're informed agents who can actually help the customer recover and put in place, this is how we're going to get you on. And what's not on that slide is the amount of cases that actually go from a debt recovery stage in council tax over to a benefits stage, where because the customer's engaged with us, because we've got that contact, the authority's been able to say, actually, you're eligible for this council tax reduction scheme, and that will lower your bill to a point where you can actually afford it. And that solves the arrears problem. And that's what we're really looking for with customers, is to fix problems with data rather than have any of them caused or have any delays because of the old sausage mill approach of doing things. A little bit over, sorry, Kirstie.
Not at all, that is absolutely fine. Thank you very much for that, Richard. That's really interesting and really helpful for everyone to sort of see how your system can be better with the new additional services that you're taking on board. And I'm liking the name drop on VRS, so thank you for that, Richard, very much appreciate it. So there was a question in the chat from Ripon, which I think has been answered by John from LNEV, which is how often, sorry, bear with me, people are asking questions I'm going, how is your data updated and how often? To which John has said, LNEV resilience updates daily in response to Ripon's question. So you've already got that one, that's great. Did anybody else have any other questions for Richard at all? Oh, there's one from Nigel Walker from Lau. Is there any recognition that whilst the customer is in a vulnerable situation, they still want to deal directly with the situation, or conversely, that they want to appoint a third party to deal with it?
I think in in the case of local authorities, and I can't speak for them as a private business really, but what we tend to see is customers in that scenario where they're falling behind on their council tax. It can be pretty early on in the scenario and in the situation of a wider indebtedness picture. So the outreach and the increased contact or the improved contact may be different to your customer base at Lowell, where they may be a lot further down the debt recovery stage if you're looking at post default and things like that. Really, the drive in using data early on is to use it as early as possible, and leading the way, local authorities that are using our scenarios and using our solutions, we're trying to get in the process as early as possible. So we're getting in before typically council tax goes to court pretty early, goes to bailiff recovery and things like that. We're trying to add intelligence as early as possible to say that may not be the best recovery route for this person, but importantly, we need them to contact us. So if we can use this data to get them to speak to us, then we can signpost them, then we can make sure they're aware of free debt advice, and whether that's, you know, pointing them to professionals that can resolve their wider debt picture, or just resolving the debt that's with the council if they've got no other debts. I think sometimes people see that they don't get much for their council tax other than their bins, because it's all kind of invisible services that just work in the background. So there is an assumption somewhere that it's one of the first debts to go. It's one of the first things to fall over is the council tax, because I'm not getting anything for it, and they're still going to come and collect my bins.
I was going to say, my bins, me and the council are having issues with garden waste collection in the southeast at the moment. Yes, it's been a little while, so I'm still waiting for that. Obviously not in the grand scheme of things, the most important, still an irritant. Any other questions for Richard at all? Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very, very much, everybody. So yeah, today we've covered a whole host of areas. So we had presentations from obviously Helen from the Vulnerability Registration Service on VRS and how we work, from Ben Furlong of EstateSearch on estate management and how they operate over there, from Cath Wohlers from the illegal money lending team on loan sharks and the amazing work that they do to prevent victims from becoming further victims down the line, from Rosie Lyon on victims of domestic abuse, Kim Hopkins from Welsh Water perspective and their initiatives they've got going on in Wales at the moment, and from Richard from Ascendant Solutions on how to integrate various systems that you use to identify vulnerability. We did have a couple of questions from Helen that were missed at the beginning, so what I'll do is I'll read those out now. Helen, if you're ready to take questions.
Sure. Yeah,
so we had a question from Lana from Care About. She asked how detailed our vulnerability records are.
Okay, so the records that we're holding, as I said, I mean, they by nature, we have to keep them relatively high level because, I mean, you could go into endless detail and still not get it right. But most of the records will have some sort of vulnerability flag on it, whether that's something like mental health, whether it's financial, whether it's risk of coercion. It'll give you an indicator. If that person should be declined credit, it will show that. And it will show the source of the data at a high level. You'll know whether it's a court of protection order, you'll know whether it's been provided by, say, a financial services provider or a local authority or something like that. Name and address, date of birth, and that's essentially it. We keep it to the barest minimum, as all good data protection compliant people should do, to actually achieve what we want it to achieve. And just actually, because Ripon raised the question about updated information, I think covered off Helen have. VRS data is updated in real time. So if somebody goes onto the register, it will be updated immediately. Similarly, if they ask us to take them off the register, if there's bulk uploads, for example, court of protection orders from local authorities, then we will load those. It's simple, secure SFTP, and we'll update it on a monthly basis, unless we're told to do any amendments in between time.
Great, thanks, Helen. Also, one of our previous speakers, so Richard Hanby, asked how big the size of our database is relative to the population.
I don't think my maths are good enough for that, but I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of records. You're not talking millions of records yet. The data that we're holding, and I think having listened to what Rosie said, what Cath said, and Ben said at the beginning, that's the data we're holding. We're holding data that are individuals who need their information taken into account. And I don't think any of us want half our customer database appearing as vulnerable. We want a manageable amount, but we want those genuine people that need to be managed appropriately. I mean, I did a little bit of a pilot for part of Birmingham Council this week around data sharing. And the results I was churning out there, there's a small pilot. I think you're talking about 500 records where people were suffering from mental health issues. About 300 of the people were actually deceased. And that lends itself back to what Ben was saying. We find out when we are being notified where people are deceased, we find out very quickly and enable organisations to act upon it. And then financial abuse. So the data is strong enough to merit being used, but it's not, we haven't got a database that's going to mean you're going to have to take on an entire new customer service department to manage it.
Yeah, we had a question from Gemma, which is for the callers on the line, actually. So any organisations. So what thresholds do other companies on the call use for automatic vulnerability markers / segmentation? As Kim from Welsh Water mentioned, customers over 90. Does anyone use anything different or additional to this? If anybody wants to raise their hand or put a comment in the chat, that'd be great. Or if anybody had any other questions at all, please feel free to raise your hand as well. Appreciate I'm putting all of my 100 or so callers on the on the hook at the moment for answering this question. No. Okay. Oh, no worries at all.
I think actually, Kirstie, just to that point, I think that's something that I'd also like to explore. I mentioned the 23rd of June, I hope you can all join us, but that's possibly something that I think we can explore a little bit further than what those sort of thresholds are. I mean, when we're deciding how to deal with vulnerable customers and what do we do with them, I think, if somebody's over 90, you perhaps don't automatically send them down a sort of chatbot route and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, it was just to understand the next level. So we work on consent and red flags when we're talking to customers, but we really need to consider those that we don't talk to. And I think with the FCA's, there's a scale of vulnerability. It's not black and white anymore. So we're trying to segment our customers up as we're moving towards more digital operations. So it's just those sorts of considerations. It'd be interesting to understand what other people use. And John did message me separately about that, so I have got a few bits to think about. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, I did see John raise his hand. Yeah.
Well, I'll just add something to that. So we use a consent model. So we will only record when the customer actually tells us and allows us to record that. However, we do use certain parameters if we want to do sort of proactive contact. So we'd use age, probably more than 90, probably around about 70 and over. We'd use other parameters such as susceptible to fraud, is not digitally active, that kind of thing, to use them as classifying them as vulnerable just for the purpose of that particular piece of contact.
Lovely, thank you, Leslie. John, you had your hand up. Would you like to input? Ooh. You're on mute, John, sorry.
Oh dear, thank you. Yeah, so just in response to Gemma's question, and I guess it was funny because I kind of raised my hand and Leslie came in, so she's kind of covered it already. But I was working at one of her competitors in August at another PRA Cat 1 firm with an extensive branch network, and they again recorded indicators such as non-English speaking, other types of kind of capacity, that type of thing. But of course, that was all on a consented basis. So if the customer didn't want to consent to that record, then they couldn't record it. Yeah, and the age question is a point that Leslie raised is interesting as well. That is used, but I guess on the customer journey they were looking at, so they use these indicators for various different types of customer journeys across their branch network. And one of the journeys that I was involved with, that they felt that age perhaps in that situation wasn't appropriate, and so I think it depends very much on the type of thing you're trying to drive. But yeah, I'm happy to catch up offline with anybody questions like that and be a little bit more open about it.
It's difficult because we don't have a branch network, so
yeah,
we have vulnerability markers where we've got consent from customers, but that's a percentage, whereas we have got guidance saying that any one point in time, 60 to 80% of people are vulnerable, so it doesn't match with where the consent. There's almost that gap in between of those that we've spoken to have consent and we're supporting, to those that could be that we don't know, but we need to make our decisions, especially around communications and digital channels, to assume that there is a level of vulnerability there when we're making those product and service decisions. So it becomes a little bit more complex, doesn't it, as you...
Yeah, I think it's
totally
easier.
Agree with that, yeah.
I think it's easier for those banks that own the primary accounts. I think there's a wealth of financial data that they are. If you have the primary account of a customer, there's a wealth of financial data in there that can help you to identify whether that customer is potentially being financially harmed, and that comes under harm rather than the vulnerability of customer journey. So yeah, so it is a bit easier for the bigger banks. I mean, they've still got, it is a challenge, and it's a challenge. The FCA's Customer Duty Act is a challenge for all, but yeah, I can sympathise with your question, Gemma, your observation.
There was another question from Nigel from Lowell in the chat. Is there any recognition that whilst the customer is in a vulnerable situation, they still want to deal directly with the situation, or conversely, that they want to appoint a third party to deal with it? If anybody wanted to pick that one up. No?
I'm not quite following that one. So if you want to give me a shout.
Yeah, Nigel, if you wanted to drop Helen an email, we'll sort of see if we can pick that one up after. That's absolutely fine. Was there any other ones that come in? Thank you for the link, Ripon, for the FCA's vulnerability model in the chat. That's great. Okay. Did anybody else have any further follow-up questions at all for anybody else that's still here? No? Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll close the session for today, but thank you very, very much to absolutely everyone for attending, all our delegates, all our speakers. I thought it was absolutely incredible session today. It really, really was. And having such a diverse range of topics that all bring it back to vulnerability, it just shows just how many different incentives out there. And we've probably barely even skimmed the surface for the amount of vulnerability options that there are for people at the moment. I will be sending through PDFs of the presentations today, and as well a recording to you guys after the session. So if I've not got anybody's email addresses, please do drop me an email. I'll put it in the chat now so you've got it. But thank you very, very much. It's been an absolutely brilliant session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
Helen and Kirstie, will just stay on for a sec.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.